Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. With me today is longtime listener, poet laureate, and Taya master Anne-Marie Young. This is your daily dose of happy. We are so happy you decided to join us today.
And we may even have a fourth guest joining us today because Joy the cat has decided to be a little bit more involved than he often is. But so if you're watching the video and you see a cat walk by the screen, you'll know what that's all about. But so far he's kind of sitting there, so we'll just see what happens. I'm not really sure what's going to play out there. But what I do know is this: we had Dr. Mark Hicks on last month, Dr. Mark A. Hicks, on last month, and it went really well. The only thing that was missing was Anne-Marie couldn't be here that day. So, we're in a new year. We figured, well, let's do it all over again. We can do it this time with Anne-Marie because she's available. And Anne-Marie, when we were talking before we got started here, we pretty much agreed, Dr. Mark's pretty much on the same page as we are, right? I mean, it's like Definitely. It's the same stuff we talk about, right?
Yeah, we just had a brief catch up just to find out what was on the last show and went through his 5 pillars. Definitely everything that we cover.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is all going to be very familiar. If you did not catch that show, I refer you back to it. It was about, I'm going to guess this. It's going to be about 10 episodes ago. So just flip back through the listings and find the previous show with Dr. Mark and listen to that, because that's where you'll find out more about the 5 pillars. Today, we're just going to kind of wing it a little bit and kind of expand the conversation because, well, first of all, love is a lot more than just 5 pillars. I mean, it's life. It's a major portion of life. It's a portion of life that we often kind of skip past, maybe even forget about for large chunks of time. Dare I say, even ignore entirely for large chunks of time, depending on who we are. But nevertheless, it still goes on in the background all the time. It goes on in the subconscious minds. It actually becomes the source of a lot of distress in the subconscious mind. It becomes the missing piece in a lot of those subconscious narratives that go on. So regardless of the way you look at it, it's a big player. It's just that we just don't pay as much attention to that. Dr. Mark, why is that? Why don't we pay attention? It's so obvious. We should be paying attention to it. Why don't we do that?
Well, it is. It's so obvious. It's right in front of us. It's something we sort of talk about all the time and yet don't really pay attention to sometimes. And I think at least one of the reasons is that we sort of assume that love is easy and natural, especially if we grew up in a family that was even halfway functional, a family that was not abusive.
That, by the way.
Yeah. I qualify that because every family's crazy in their own way. Every family has their quirks. Every family's a little weird, and that's okay. What we hope is the family is not abusive or toxic. Yes. That's what we hope to avoid.
Which happens anyway.
Happens, and it happens frequently. So if you grew up in an abusive household, love might be a topic you just want to avoid. It might be a topic that brings up a lot of bad memories, and you think love is just not for you. In fact, I talked to a person recently that said, I don't believe love exists. I think it's a fantasy that people buy into. She didn't say this is my interpretation, but she said it, the way she said it made me think that she thinks it's like Santa Claus. It's something that we all agree on. It's something we have fun with. It's something we enjoy. It's something that that people can kind of buy into for a while and we can have fun with it, but it doesn't really exist. Hopefully no children are watching at the current moment.
Actually, that's an interesting parallel right there, because I think it's a really good parallel. I mean, you will get different opinions where Santa Claus is concerned. Just watch see a few of those opinions. But the fact is, for a lot of people, Santa Claus and love are almost identical. They're equivalent.
It's just a fantasy. It's just something that we all kind of enjoy, but it's not real. There's not tangible. There's no real evidence of it. In fact, you can find a lot of evidence against it in the world of if you really start thinking about it. And that's where she came down, is that people just fantasize about it and they live out that fantasy sometimes in their own imagination. They create that fantasy if they're lucky with a partner. If the few lucky ones that come along might even be able to live out that fantasy. But to her, love did not even exist. And for others, love, they would argue love exists. They grew up with it. They grew up in a functional family and they experienced love, and they began to think, that's easy. It just happens because people love each other, your family. And if you're married, you have siblings, you have friends, you just love them. And it's supposed to be easy. And then people are shocked to find out that it's not really easy. Relationships are work and they fail, and it doesn't come naturally. Every human being has the capacity for love naturally, but that doesn't mean we're going to have loving relationships naturally. And I think that's where the people get tripped up, is they assume because every human being has the capacity to love and the capacity to be loved and the value to be loved, we assume it's just going to happen. And that's just not true. There are real things in love that have to be learned. And what I teach in my book is that love is a learned skill set, that we have to learn to love. And we learn those pillars, those components of love, and put them into practice, then anyone can have good relationships. So I would very much disagree to say love doesn't exist. Love very much exists, but it is a learned skill set that has to be practiced.
What do you think, Anne-Marie? Is love a skill set that has to be practiced, that you have to learn it?
The tough one, because sometimes it feels it just comes really naturally, like when you give birth, you have a child, it just comes out of you, and that just feels very natural. And I was very lucky in the fact that my parents loved each other to the moon and back. So I don't know any different, but I'm just trying to think, if that wasn't the case and I didn't grow up in that loving environment, then I wouldn't have learnt that.
Yeah.
So
the capacity is certainly
would
there.
be a learn. Yeah.
The capacity is certainly there. There's no human on earth that would fail to have the capacity for love. And yes, sometimes it just clicks. Sometimes it's just natural. And that's beautiful when that happens. We want that to happen. But even in that, many people, for instance, in their marriage, early years of their marriage, it just clicked. It was just natural. It was wonderful. And then over the years, they find out it takes some work. It takes some effort. And that's okay. That's not a failure. And sometimes it's seen as one because we think it's supposed to be easy. And that if it's not easy anymore, it fails somewhere along the way. That's not true. That people would punish themselves and think badly of their own relationship. It just means that it takes some work along the way and some practice.
One thing that does occur to me where love is concerned, and really this is going to be true for anything emotionally related, is if love is stuff that feels good, it's good feeling stuff, and we're not feeling good, we're going to be a lot less likely to think that love exists. Mm-hmm. If we're feeling good pretty regularly, we're going to feel that love definitely exists. If we're feeling pretty good, like some of the time and not so much other time, then we're kind of like on the fence about it. I mean, I really do believe our experience is going to drive whether or not we believe in it.
Yeah, I think so. And when we say feel good, that gets into that area of emotion. And emotion is a big part of love. When we feel good, we feel that connection. That's the emotional aspect of love. In my book, I list emotion as the second component of love. Right. And it is an important aspect, a vital aspect of love. But, our emotions can be affected by a lot of things.
All
the time, if we don't sleep well, if we have a cold, there's so many things. If someone said something rude to us at the supermarket, we can have different feelings than maybe we did earlier in that day. And that's the small things. There's a lot of big things, of course. If we're going through grief, if we're going through some sort of tragedy in life, if we lost a job, we're certainly not going to feel good at that point. That's where love becomes more practical, making good, sound decisions. Practicality, I list as the third component of love, that we sometimes don't feel good, but we can still have loving relationships when we make good decisions in those relationships, even during the bad times, even during the struggles. Another aspect of that about feeling good, it's not just emotion, it's about loving yourself. Sometimes feeling good comes because we have a foundational love for ourselves. We cannot love other people more than we love ourselves. It's impossible. Brene Brown did some great research on this. Other people have as well. I always mention her because she's the most noted researcher in this area right now. But she has shown in her research, you can't love other people more than you love yourself. And so that feeling good sometimes comes because there's a void that we're trying to get filled from someone else. And that, if they can do it, which is rare, it can only be temporary. Someone else feeling that void of emptiness we have because we don't love ourselves is only a temporary feeling. To feel good on a more permanent level, that's not based on, not affected as much by colds and lack of sleep or whatever. It's about truly loving who we are in order to love other people.
Interesting the way you phrase that, because the thought that goes through my mind is that when we examine how we feel about any given situation, loving or otherwise, the feeling does tend to drive the thought process. But the point you're making, which I think is an extremely valid one, is that the thought process drives the feeling. And the reason I think that's so important is that took me years to learn that one. I didn't learn that until after I was age 50. I literally did not think it was possible. I really didn't. For the longest time, the first time I discovered it was possible, you could have knocked me over with a feather. I was so shocked. So yeah.
I think so. And I really think one affects the other. What I often say is that emotion brings us together. Practicality keeps us together. Sure. It's like one leads to the other, that we do need both our head and our heart engaged in these loving relationships and these healthy relationships. That, our feelings are going to vary at different times in life. Our thought processes are going to vary at different times in our life. Our viewpoint, our perspective is going to change at different points in our life. And that may be when our heart has to lead the way. It's a balancing act in these components. And the reason I think that's so important is because there's going to be one that's more comfortable for most people. Some people they feel very good about emotion. That's what they do. It comes natural to them. It flows from them, and they connect very easily on an emotional level. And they don't want it to be cerebral. They don't want it to be analytical. They don't want it to have to think about these array of decisions we need to make in relationships. They want it to be an emotional ride. And then other people, they say things like, love is commitment. Love is loyalty, and they want it to be a cerebral decision-making, doing the right thing kind of commitment. And they don't emphasize emotion as much because they're a cerebral, thoughtful person that doesn't really feel as comfortable with emotion. A lot of that depends on personality. A lot of it depends on how we were raised, but both are equally important. So if I'm talking to a person that's very emotional in their relationships, I'm probably going to talk a lot about practicality. But if I get a person that talks about commitment and loyalty and honor and doing the right thing, I'm going to talk a lot about emotion and learning to say I love you and learning to share your heart, because both are equally important.
Oh, come on. You just like pushing buttons.
Well, that's true too. Yeah.
I mean, let's be real here. That's what that is.
Yeah. I mean, if you want
push another button here,
you want to be completely honest about it. Yeah, sure.
I say that in jest, but actually, that's really the way a lot of people interact with each other. We have a tendency to respond to and react to people who present viewpoints that are different from ours in a way that is like challenges them. Basically says you're wrong and I'm right. It's a very common kind of conversation to have, either externally or even inside your own head. And as a result of that, we humans have this tendency to kind of flip things over all the time and always be in contrast, in competition. I don't know how you want to phrase it, but we're kind of like on this flip side thing, and that can be good, but it can also be problematic. It can work either way.
Yeah, there's the old saying that opposites attract. I don't know if that's always true, but there's a reason there's a saying, because sometimes it is, and not just in romantic relationships, but even at work, in friendships. Sometimes we're kind of drawn to that person. If we're an emotional thinking person, a feeling person, things are, we wear our emotions on our sleeve and we follow our heart. Sometimes we are drawn to people that are more solid decision makers, very cerebral. They think through things. That can be very helpful, and vice versa. Sometimes people that are cerebral, they like being around the more emotional people up to a point, But at the same time, we get on each other's nerves when that's not the person we are. So we are drawn to it. We need it. But it gets on our nerves at the same time sometimes and draws those struggles in relationships. And that's why it's important to understand it's not right or wrong. It's both. And if we can do both ourselves, that's the healthiest scenario. Even if it doesn't come natural, learning to do the one that is not as natural to you is important. But it's also important sometimes to let other people kind of lead the way and learn from their example if that's not as natural to you, particularly if you have an opposite in your marriage.
Yeah, well, certainly that would be a primary place to learn. I'm not sure that people start at that primary place. They probably more often start with the guy, they see at the other end of the bar, and they're talking to that person rather than the home relationship, because that one's safer, right?
Yeah.
You're less likely to get into fisticuffs over that one.
Yeah, and some of it is just, at one time, I think a lot of it was kind of random. More and more people are meeting online with profiles and AI connections and, psychological profiles and those type of things. So you may more and more get linked up with people that are more compatible with you. But then it's still important. If you've got two very emotional people, heart-led people in a relationship, there's still decisions to be made in that relationship. Still practical elements to making a relationship work that need to be thought out. So understanding that it's not just about that initial connection, it's about building a healthy life over time.
That's making me think of something. I went through a divorce a couple of years ago, and so I'm readjusting to the I guess you could call it the singles market or the singles environment. Perhaps it's the better way to describe it. And as I'm doing that, I am much more aware than I was of the mindsets, the attitudes, the expressed beliefs that tend to come out of that population. And I have to admit, I'm almost shocked. Now, I try to think back to before I got married. Was I in that same mindset? And probably was to an extent, but maybe just having gone through what was mostly a healthy marriage kind of fell apart communication-wise the last few years. But up until then, it was pretty good. Coming out the other side and just being amazed at how few people really have a good handle on what they're looking for in a relationship. I don't care what kind of relationship, whether it be a primary relationship, a business relationship, a friend relationship. It's almost like half the world is waiting for the other half of the world to tell them what kind of relationships they should want.
Yeah.
I mean, do you see that, Anne-Marie? Do you experience that?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that as you was talking. I've got somebody who's doing the same job with me. He's just joined our company, and we actually work really well together. But I'm trying to understand him as a person, and vice versa, because we've been chucked together in this situation where we're spending 8 hours a day with each other. I haven't chosen that. I'm not unhappy with it. It's working really well, but it's just, you are thrown together with all these people. And also, if you think about it in a relationship, I met my husband 26 years ago, but he met a different version of Anne-Marie. Anne-Marie now is very different, and he's very different to who I married. So we've, you've got to grow together.
Oh, absolutely. You hear so many people that say things like, well, that's not the person I married 20 years ago. And well, of course not. We change. That's absolutely true. That is not the same person. We change over the years. And that is that idea of staying in love first with yourself, to love who you are through all the changes of life and continue in that love so that you can continue to give love to your partner and accept them as well as you accept yourself. And it is that, again, that practical side of understanding the changes of life, understanding the development of life, communication, through that's a practical skill. It's a learned skill. You can learn how to communicate. It's a difficult skill. Not everybody masters that very easily, but it is a skill that can be learned and can be developed. And learning to do all of those things, learning to have fun together, and enjoying life together, even though life is difficult, and having all these things over time. It is a process. It is a process of learning to practice. And that's why I keep going back to that word practice, because even if it was very easy at the beginning, 25 years later, especially if you have children in the household and that kind of thing. It's going to be a different world. One of the things that I've had the opportunity to do as a therapist and also working in the theological realms, I've had a chance to do premarital counseling with a number of people. And I always ask them a couple of questions. And the conversation always went the same way. I would say, do you know the divorce rate? And in the U.S., everybody knows it's around 50%. You know, it varies, it goes up and down, but it's somewhere around 50%, 40, 50% over the last few decades. And so everybody says about 50%. And I said, of the people who stay married in their first marriage for the rest of their lives, how many of those are happy? And the mood starts to change at that point, because it's really easy to assume when you're in their starry-eyed love phase of engagement that you're going to be part of the 50% that makes it. But when you ask the question, how many are happy? They start going through the relationships of how many would they emulate from their family, from their neighbors, from their friends, from the coworkers that they know that are married. How many marriages do they see and think, that's what I want? And the answer came back every time, not many.
Wow.
And I would say, could we say half? Could we say half of the marriages that stay married are happy? And every single time the answer was probably not. And I would say, every time I would say the same thing, I want to be optimistic. So I'm going to say 50%. So let's say at least half of the marriages who stay married for the first marriage, the rest of their life, are happy ones. That means 75% of people that get married are either going to divorce or wish they could. They either stay married for the kids, for money, for religion, for guilt, for whatever reason. There's a lot of good reasons to do that, a lot of maybe bad reasons to do it too. But there's a lot of reasons people stay married when they're not happy together. 75% then would stay married because when they're not happy, or they would go ahead and divorce. And I would always ask, what are you going to do to beat the odds?
At this point, the couple that you're counseling is saying, I'm getting really depressed here.
Yeah, it did change the tone, and and I admit maybe it's a little rough, but it did serve to get a conversation started about what are you going to do to beat the odds. I want you to make it. I want you to be happy. That's why I'm here as a counselor. I want you to be happy in your marriage. So what are you going to do? Understanding that if you make it and you're happy, you've beaten the odds. So it's not just going to happen. And that's what my book is about, of beating the odds.
It's a heck of a question, because honestly, I'd be willing to bet most. I mean, you tell me, Emery, because you know as well as I do what it's like going into a marriage. I'm willing to bet that if you ask that question, you get a lot of gaping mouths and blank looks because they don't know how to answer the question. Yeah. There's not enough background. There's not enough personal experience to answer the question.
Yeah. It's exactly. And I had, because I got married in the church, I had to go to get a little bit of premarital counselling, and that question never came up. And I was trying to think, what would my belief be? And I only have the example of my past, which fortunately was a good experience, and sort of with my parents, having that role model. But if you haven't got that, and 75% of the country don't, that makes it an even harder question.
It's a that's why love is not easy. And we talk about coworkers, we talk about friendships, we could bring similar kinds of conversations into the mix. But talking about marriage and romantic relationships, most either don't make it, or at least a percentage, I'm guessing, I'm just putting a random number on it, but at least a percentage are not happy. They're staying married for other reasons other than they are happily married. And so what we want is for people to beat the odds, to change that people can learn to practice love, that even though there will be hardships along the way, what are the building blocks, the pillars, the components, the aspects of what love is? Because what we don't do in society is talk about what love actually is, the foundational pillars of what it is, to practice it.
That's another way to get a lot of good blank looks from people.
Yeah,
asking what it is, and like, I don't know. It's just kind of, you know it when you feel it.
Exactly. We just sort of randomly assume that if you're with the right person, that it will just happen magically. Well, there are people you're compatible with, and those you are not, and that's a reality. But even those you're compatible with, life gets in the way. There are a lot of difficult things along the way in every relationship. And so there has to be that practice of what love is and how we actually live it out. And that's really the mission I'm on, is to try to answer that question with people of how are we going to beat the odds? How are we going to have healthy relationships when most people don't? The Surgeon General of the United States put out a report last year saying that the United States is in an epidemic of loneliness. They called it a public health crisis.
Right.
I don't think it's limited to the U.S. I think it's in a lot of places in the world. And so even if we are in relationships, we're not necessarily feeling connected. We're feeling very lonely. Almost everyone has relationships of some kind with their parents, with their family, with friends, social media, all kinds of connections. But in the midst of that, we're still feeling very lonely as human beings around the world. And as I said, there's that study documents it in the U.S., but I'm feeling very strongly that you could do that same study in almost every country in the world and get similar results. And so we have to learn how to beat these odds, and there is a way to do it. That's what I want to say, is not just to sound the alarm to say, hey, we're kind of in trouble here on relationships, but to say this is how we can get out of this. This is how we can build healthy, happy, thriving relationships, because we have the building blocks, the components, understanding those and building relationships on those.
Which is great, because if you go into a job, if you go into a loan agreement, you know all this information, you know exactly what you're dealing with. And actually marriage is a lifetime thing. It's an even longer commitment. And those questions don't necessarily get asked. Yeah,
we go to school. For many jobs, you're required to go to university for 4 years, maybe 6 years or 10 years, depending on the job, to get a master's or a doctorate. You go to 1 or 2 years of trade school. You're going to work as an intern or apprentice on many jobs. And then when you go to that job, you're going to spend a year or 2 years as an entry-level employee, very many times, making minimum money, because you're expected to learn that job. What you didn't learn in college and at university, you learn on the job, the real world. And so we're spending years preparing for a career, for our job, to make money. We do the same thing if we take up a hobby. If we take up golf, it's very likely that you go to the pro shop and take a couple of lessons, or at least go on YouTube and watch a few pro golfers, showing lessons. We spend some time and some effort learning how to play that game in order to enjoy it, to be good at it. And maybe not good in the sense of professional level, but just enough to enjoy the game. We put all this effort into learning all these things in life: how to cook, how to drive a car, all these things that we learn how to do, that somebody shows us this is how to do it. And then when it comes to how do you build friendships, how do you build a healthy marriage, how do you build a healthy family, we just say, do it the way your family did it. And if your family was wonderful, that might work. And if your family was not, it might not. And even my family was wonderful as well. I can relate to what you're saying, Anne-Marie, because I had wonderful parents that adored each other, and I had a great example of what marriage is. And yet I just assumed, coming from that family, that that's just the way it works. You meet somebody you're compatible with, and you live the rest of your life happily ever after, the way they did. And because I was so naive coming out of a healthy family, I didn't know how cruel the world could be. And I ended up in a horribly toxic first marriage. I did not know all the things I know now back then. And it was just a horrible experience. And it ended in divorce. And so even as I came from a healthy family with a good example, for me, that created a naive view of the world, that I didn't understand that not everyone's going to be that way. Not every relationship is just going to happen the way my parents did. And it was a dreadful experience. Now I have a second chance. I'm remarried. I have a wonderful relationship. I'm very fortunate. And I have often said I have had a bad marriage and a good marriage, and good is better. We need to learn good.
No doubt about that. So for me, this comes right back to what I was talking about earlier when I spoke about people, particularly in the singles market, because we're talking a lot here about romantic relationships, but this applies to all relationships. People who are looking to other people, the people that they're hoping to connect to define their relationship for them.
Yeah.
And to me, it's insane, because how can you possibly get the kind of relationship you want if you don't know what you want?
Yeah, that's so true. And in lots of areas of life, you ask people what they want and they can't define it.
Right.
In their job, in their career, in their financial life, everything. But yes, to your point, even in relationships, you ask, what do you want? And, maybe they know what they are attracted to in the sense of what a person might look like. And that's important enough. I don't want to downplay that too much. Sure, you want to be attracted to a partner, of course, but that may be as far as it goes, is a type physically that they enjoy looking at, but not really understand the depths of relationships. And when you don't know what love is, you don't know what you're trying to accomplish, and you're trying to get someone else to define that for you. And I would go a step further, that not only are we trying to get people to define what a relationship is for us, we're trying to get other people to define who we are for us.
Yeah, that's even worse.
And that's the struggle, is we're looking to be validated by other people, that if somebody loves me, then that validates me, and then I can love myself. And that sounds logical, but it absolutely does not work.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that if we think through it, okay, that sounds like that might work. You get a spouse, a partner, somebody who's just wonderful, and they love you and they accept you, then it's going to be a lot easier to accept yourself. It sounds like that would work. It absolutely does not. You have to love yourself in order to love other people. And so when we're looking to other people to validate who we are, define who we are, and to define what a healthy relationship is for us, we're really setting ourselves up. And the problem is, the sad thing, and I hate to sound like an alarmist, but there are a lot of predators out there.
Oh yeah.
There are a lot of people that will prey on the weak, those that are looking to be validated, those that are looking for somebody to define them and define a relationship and to fill a void in their life. There are a lot of predators that can see that coming. They are good at what they do. They have that instinct to understand where
that's low-hanging fruit. That's the easy one.
Yeah, they see that so easily, and it's just sad that someone is looking for a relationship to validate them, and what they run into is a predator that will tell them what they want to hear, but it actually ends up being a very toxic or abusive relationship.
And then they don't understand why it is that they keep having the same kind of relationship over and over again.
Yes, exactly. Why does this keep happening to me? And it keeps happening. One reason, there can be more than one, but one reason is we have to love ourselves first. And if we are looking for validation, somebody will know how to manipulate that. They will know how to give you what you want to hear in order to get what they want, to twist that relationship the way they want it to be. And it tends to be a very abusive relationship. And it can happen over and over again if we don't learn the lesson to love ourselves first.
So let's take a moment and define that. Let's try to define what self-love is. I mean, how do we understand that? How can we come to understand it? Maybe that's the better way of phrasing it. How can we come to understand what it is for me to love myself?
Yeah, there has to be a sense of value that we, beyond what we do or how we look or what we've accomplished or what degrees we have or how much money we have, beyond all of that, that there is an inherent core value that we are an exquisite being just because we are.
I like that word, exquisite. Good choice.
And that's just who we are. And I always have a little analogy, and I believe I may have shared this on the show before, but if you'll indulge me again just for a moment.
We do it all the time, don't worry.
Yeah.
I didn't hear it.
You didn't hear it, so this is for you, Emery.
I didn't hear it. You tell me.
So this is, just imagine there is a diamond the size of a baseball. Perfectly cut, perfectly clear, baseball-sized diamond. How much would that be worth? Well, obviously, it's priceless. So you take that diamond out into a rural area, you come to a cow pasture, and you roll it around in the muck and the mire and the cow manure, and bring that diamond back in. And how much is it worth now? It is still priceless as long as you understand what it is. And what we have to come to understand, if we understand self-love, is that all the stuff in our life, the mistakes we've made, the stuff people have done to us, the things that have just happened, all the very long list we all have of regrets and struggles and hardships. That's life. That's being rolled around in that muck and mire and cow manure, which is life. Doesn't mean life is bad. It just means that stuff happens. But underneath that, we are still that exquisite diamond. We are still the exquisite human being that we were created to be. And the work of life and the work of love and the work of purpose and all of these things is to clean that up, is to start cleaning up and seeing glimpses underneath of how valuable, how precious that we all really are. And
washing the muck away.
Yeah, washing all that muck away. And that's the purpose when it's done well, of faith and religion, of getting rid of the muck and understanding the exquisite of the created being that we are. That's the purpose of psychology and counseling, is cleaning up all that muck and understanding our own value. That's the work of philosophy, is cleaning up all that muck and understanding who we really are. There's so many fields that have that as their center core, because that's who we are. We are that exquisite creation. And when I say creation, some people will acquaint that with God, that there was a supreme being that created us. From a Christian perspective, the Bible says that we were created in God's image, and God is love. For others, our creation was not from a divine being, but it was from evolution, billions and billions and billions of years of evolution, that random events came together so that we could be a person, an entity that has the capacity for things like love and laughter and connection. And I'm going to argue that that's an amazing, absolutely incredible origin story too. That either way, whichever one you are prone to, whether you're a person of faith that believes we were created by a divine being, or whether you are a person that believes that we are from evolution, or some people have a way of mixing these and believing both at the same time.
Well, they're crazy people like me. I mean, I kind of take it to the point where I created me, you created you, we all created ourselves. So, and
whatever road you take,
how does that work?
Whatever road you take, it's an amazing origin story. That we as humans are amazing in the sense that we are who we are, that we have even the capacity to love. And we do have the capacity for thought and for connection. And we have that heart and head knowledge that we can connect on so many levels. We are amazing beings. We don't always live up to that reputation, but we are amazing at our core. And as I said, regardless of your origin story, it's an amazing origin story. And what we see, though, on ourselves and others is that muck and mire and cow manure. And what we understand is that's not us. That's the stuff we go through in life. That doesn't define us. What defines us is who we are. And if we start catching a glimpse of that and start practicing that and saying, okay, that mistake I made, that's not who I am. That's a mistake I made that I can now correct. Or what was done to me, especially if it was an abuse, is to understand that was done to me. That was not who I am. That doesn't define who I am as a person or my worth. It's what someone else did to me who has their own issues of worth. And so when we start to catch a glimpse of that and see that our job, our purpose, our destiny, our calling is to clean up all that muck and realize who we are, it becomes a lot easier to start loving ourselves. And when we love ourselves, we have the capacity to love others.
I like that diamond metaphor because of two things. First of all, it's a great way to tie in value, which is, of course, what you were doing there, tying in the concept of value. But it's also a great way to tie in the concept of appreciation and gratitude, because the wiping away of the muck is literally increasing one's perception of the value of the thing. It is appreciation.
Yeah.
So you tied it all into one very nice metaphor. I like
that. We appreciate ourselves, and we can then start looking at other people the same way and realizing, they look pretty rough. But that's because the mistakes they've made, the things that have been happening to them, the abuse that was put on them, perhaps in their own childhood. And we can start to see that no matter how rough they look, there's also that exquisite diamond underneath. And so we can treat other people as valued, even if they don't look like it or deserve it in their own actions, just like we can treat ourselves of value, but we have to start with ourselves so that we can treat other people that way.
I have a friend that I met through a local meetup group called the Esoteric Spiritual Warriors Group. And his name is Elmer. And Elmer and I get together usually at least once a month. And sometimes other members of the group are also there too. And talking about all kinds of spiritual issues and, belief systems and unusual things that have happened and astral projection and all this other kind of stuff,
Yeah.
And it's fun. And it's also a great way to connect to somebody who's like-minded and so on and so forth. One of the things that we were talking about just this past Saturday when we got together was how we can both see, like you talk to a lot of people, particularly people who've come onto this program, but even just out in the world, a lot of people talk about how there's a great awakening going on right now. There's an enlightenment that's going on. It's kind of a global thing. And it's happening, kind of rolling out slowly over, depending on who you talk to, a 10, 20-year period. Maybe it goes on for another 10 or 15 years. Again, depending on what the person's perspective is. But there's this general belief that there is this appreciation, this enlightenment that's going on right now. And he and I both agreed we can see it in people. And not only do we see it in people, I was commenting how I can see it to degrees in people. Like I can almost tell just by talking to somebody for a moment, you can, it's like they're giving off a vibration that says, here's how far I am along that path of enlightenment. Here's how far I am along that path of self-development and self-love and all that, all the good stuff that we've been talking about here. And to me, it's fascinating because what that really means is we are all continuously putting out, for lack of a better word, putting out that vibration. We're putting out a message, if you will, an energetic message that continuously conveys, this is who I am, this is where I'm at, this is where I'm moving toward, and we're blind to our own message. That's the part that just continues to blow my mind. We're picking this up. I mean, even people who aren't spiritually attuned pick this up from other people. They don't pick it up from themselves. None of us do. I mean, because, we live with ourselves all day long, all week long, all month long, all year long. We don't notice big changes. We don't notice even the small changes. We just notice that we're dealing with that muck every single day.
Yeah.
But we see it so easily in everybody else. Yeah. I find that fascinating.
Yeah, and that is such a downfall that we have as we are continually looking at everyone else and measuring everyone else and judging everyone else. Whether we judge them positively or negatively, we're spending a lot of time judging other people. And when we start seeing ourselves, and not in a negative sense of evaluating our flaws, we can see those pretty easily, but start seeing that, start awakening, as you're saying, to our own value, our own worth, our own spirituality. The value that comes in that is transformational. And just as I said earlier, that when you are looking for validation from other people and you're looking for other people to define you and to define relationships, there are predators out there that will see that coming. The opposite is also true. When you're cleaning up that muck and you're starting to radiate, you're starting to show that exquisite nature of who you are, and you know it. And it's not an egotistical thing, because we are born with this. This is who we are, that we are created this way as human beings. And we start to see the exquisitely beautiful creation that we actually are. People are going to see that too. They may not be able to define it, but they'll be drawn to that. We'll have healthier connections with people because we're radiating that value, that worth, and we can see it in ourselves and we can see it in them, and they're going to want to see that. So just as when we have that void, a predator will come to take advantage of that. When we are radiating the exquisite nature of our human state of who we are, and we're cleaning that muck and showing that diamond, people are going to be drawn to that. The people that are seeking those healthy connections, those that are wanting to find their own self-worth as well and are catching little glimpses, there's going to be healthy connections come from that.
And to me, that's exciting. Because when I start adding up all of, I don't know how else to say it, basically adding up all of the growth that goes on in humans, and is going on, from my perspective, it's going on at a faster rate than it ever has in prior human history. In fact, I would say it's almost exponential. It is really a ramping up compared to even 20 years ago, let alone 50 or 100 years ago. I mean, it's a massive difference. And I look how quickly that's piling up, that personal growth, that insight, that connectedness to others and so forth, even in this realm, even in this age where so many people feel disconnected. You were making reference to that earlier. Yeah. So many people, there's a big depression thing going on right now. And yet, even with that, people are still building connection with themselves, with others, becoming more aware of that diamond underneath the muck that you're talking about. It's fascinating to watch. It's fascinating to be a part of it.
I think everything in life is speeding up. I think what we are seeing is a world that is just exponentially faster than it's ever been before. And that's both positive and negative. And so, yes, we're seeing more and more loneliness, more and more people struggling with, the downside of social media and things like that. And yet, at the same time, the positives are speeding up as well. And we need to foster that, the sense of what love is, and the spiritual connection, and the understanding of human value. I agree with you. I think there's more and more people that are coming to ask that question at the very least, and beginning to answer it in positive ways. And there are connections because of social media and because of shows like yours that we can have these conversations that is speeding that up as well. And I think that's what we're wanting as humans, because it's easy to see how the negatives have sped up so much. It's so much easier to have conflicts around the world than it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. It's just so much faster that pandemics, as we came through 5 years ago, that wasn't as much back 100, 200 years ago. It existed, but people weren't traveling as much, didn't have air travel and all those things. Now everything moves fast, but these positive things, these spiritual awakenings, when they start taking root, they grow much faster as well. And that's what we need.
Yeah. And they're powerful too. They're quietly powerful. They don't make a lot of noise like the negative ones do. Right. Negative ones make lots of noise. They're very noisy. They're the ones that everybody sees easily because they're so noisy.
Yeah.
But the positive ones are very quiet, but the power behind them is immense. Try to move it. Try to move it out of the way. It's not going to happen because it's too strong.
Well, our brains are sort of wired up to see the negative because we need to be protected. There's a lot of dangerous things in the world. And so throughout human history, there's been dangerous animals. There's been dangerous people. There's been a lot of things we need to watch out for. And so our brains are wired up to protect us, to see what might harm us. And it's true of both physical harm and emotional harm. So we always naturally look for those things. Our brains don't necessarily remember good things the same way because they're not going to hurt us. If we miss out on a good thing, we're still safe. If we miss out on a bad thing, we could be in a very unsafe situation. So our brains are constantly on the alert for the bad stuff, and we notice it. But the good stuff, we have to learn. We have to practice that. That's again going back to that practical side of love, of teaching our brains to see those good things. It goes into the passion of teaching our brains to still have fun, even in a difficult world, and to have the enjoyment and laugh together and remember to do those things. That takes a little bit of practice. It doesn't come as natural as, putting our barriers up to see the bad things of life and protect ourselves, but to buy into and teach our brains to see and notice and remember and hold on to the good things of life because they're there. That spiritual awakening is there, the connections are there, the love is there, and the way to practice these things are all there. It's just we have to look for them and take advantage of what we see.
And Emery, I know that a lot we're talking about here is stuff that you and I talk about a lot, that we talk about with other guests and so forth. I'm just kind of curious, which parts are like resonating the most with you right now? Like what's grabbing your attention?
So much, it all. As you was just talking then, I was thinking about, like, we were in the car the other day listening to the radio and the news came on and it was a murder here and this, that, there, and an attack here. And I turned it off in the end. And my daughter was like, that's so depressing. I was like, yeah, but you're only ever going to hear that. That's why Mummy doesn't listen to the news. I was like, you don't hear about the millions of positive things that are going on in the world. And I kind of say that I like to treat my mind like people treat food. Like, don't just put the good stuff in. Don't put the stuff that's going to poison it. Don't put the stuff that's going to turn it toxic. Treat your mind like you would your stomach. put the good stuff in it.
Absolutely.
Because people are so they can relate to their physical health, but actually your mental health and what you put in there is so important.
I love that. Can I quote you on that? I think that's fabulous. That's a great
Absolutely,
analogy.
you do that.
Yeah, that's a great analogy because it's true. It affects, just as the food affects our bodies, what we put in our minds is going to affect us, and it's going to be much more easy to see the bad stuff. And as you point out, the bad stuff is going to be pointed out to us much more through the news, through the media. The negative stuff is going to be there, and so we have to look for the good stuff and pay attention when it comes, and not let it get lost in all the negativity. And to have that healthy mind, it takes putting the healthy things in.
So true. Yeah. The healthy mind is something that I kind of think that this ties back to the whole enlightenment thing we were talking about a moment ago. I think the enlightenment thing is driven by the fact that people are becoming more aware of the health or lack thereof of their own minds. They may not have answers yet. They may not have even defined, going back to the earlier question that we raised, they may not have even defined what they want their relationships in life to be like. But they do have some sense of where their health level is, mentally speaking. And to one degree or another, they're trying to wrestle with that.
Yeah. And it really, in fairness to us that are wrestling with all of this, it's a fairly new phenomenon. Psychology, that really is the science of mental health, is a pretty new field. 1900 or so is when it began, so 125 years. That's vastly different than some of the other fields that are out there. Agriculture, for example, is as old as humanity. And so as a field, as a understanding, mental health has only been part of the professional world. Sigmund Freud is often seen as the trailblazer there. There was others, but that's around 1900. And so we really didn't get into modern psychology until about the 1960s, and it's continued to evolve and change. And so the concept of mental health is probably on about 25 to 50 years old as far as the general public knows, because it takes a while when a new profession comes on the scene. What Sigmund Freud was studying in 1900 or so was not heard by the farmer in Kansas in the U.S. or a factory worker in New York City. That they weren't hearing that. No. So when did we start really hearing about the importance of mental health and how to develop that? Just within a few decades, not long at all. And so we're just getting into that. It's really in its infancy, but because we are in this era where everything is moving so fast, it has grown so quickly that people kind of assume, we've known about mental health forever. Not really. This is all new to us, and thankfully, it's starting to take root. That's why some of the stigma was at the beginning, because people just didn't know. People are always afraid of what they don't understand at first, what they've never heard of before. So mental health was a stigma. That's changing. Has further to go, but it's changing. And we still have a ways to go with it, but this very new phenomenon is definitely taking hold, and people are understanding your mental health is just as important and tied to your physical health.
Definitely. Can I ask you a question?
Of course.
Do you think in some ways we're going a bit to mental health? Because my daughter a couple of years ago said to me, "Mum, have I got mental health issues?" I was like, "No, darling. No, darling, you don't." She goes, "But sometimes I feel sad and this, and the other." That's normal. And I wonder if we're impacting people's resilience by going, a negative emotion, that's what you need to talk about it. Sometimes you need to feel those negative emotions. So do you think there's a balance that's going a bit to the other scale?
I think it can. I think you have an important point there. And I think it goes back to that infancy, that we don't always know how to handle something that's so new in our culture, that some people will push it way too far and not quite use it the right ways. And that's true of every field. Every field of study has that element to it. But yes, we can overemphasize mental health as if we're supposed to feel good every day, and if we don't, there's something wrong with us. Or if we have a diagnosis that there's something wrong with us, that's not true. That depression, anxiety are part of life, but there are also chronic conditions, and so we've not quite learned the right language We've used the word depression to mean everything from, I just didn't sleep well last night, I don't feel good, to, I watched a movie that really just broke my heart. The storyline just ripped my heart out, and now I just feel so down. To there are people who have an actual brain condition. There is a chemical condition in the brain that needs medical treatment. And those are vastly different things. Feeling the blues because, your sports team lost and you just feel really down about it, that is a depressive state, but it's very different than having a chemical condition in the brain that causes you to be depressed that can be treated with medication. Those are different things, but we call both depression. When a person's going through grief, they've lost someone close to them, they've had a person in their life who has died, there is a state of depression. That's very different than, again, the other examples that I've talked about. But that condition can lead to chemical changes in the brain that do need medication, but not always. And so we use the same word for several different, vastly different conditions. And so I think your point is well taken, that sometimes we just don't have a good handle on this. People use it against each other or against themselves when we're just not quite defining our terms very well yet in this pretty new field, and we aren't fully educated as a public. We're getting there. It's helping. I think we're making good progress, but we've still got a lot of work to do to understand the concepts of mental health.
Yeah. Thank you.
And to tie back to what you were talking about earlier, Dr. Mark, when you were talking about how people kind of assume that if we're talking about a marriage or a potential relationship, these days, actually, with the way marriage trends are going, you're actually in the realm of alternative relationships more often than you are in marriage.
Yeah.
But with whatever kind of relationship however you're structuring it, still the bottom line is people do assume, like you were talking about earlier, they assume that happiness kind of just comes into it. That it just kind of falls in, and yet there's also an awareness that happiness can be elusive, and the best example of how much awareness there is of that, from my perspective, comes from the Ivy League schools, particularly Harvard and Yale, both of which introduced classes in happiness and in the psychological theories behind happiness, basically introductions to positive psychology.
Yeah.
And in both cases, the number of people who signed up for the classes, I think at Harvard, it was 1/5 of the entire student body signed up for the class. At Yale, it was about 1/6 of the entire student body. Yeah. Because those people, particularly in an Ivy League school, they're so stressed out.
Yes.
They get so easily depressed because they were always the high achievers. They were the valedictorians of their own classes, and now they can't even hardly swim. And they're dealing with all this stuff, all the pressures that they put on themselves, that the school puts on them too, and so forth. And they're realizing, I don't know what happiness is, and so they start taking classes in it. So to me, that's an indicator that we do have a tendency to think that, well, happiness will just kind of come, but there's also a large chunk of us that are saying, I got to go find it. I don't know what it is, but there's an expert out there who's going to teach it to me, and I got to find it.
Yeah. That's what I did.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what everyone has to do. You have to find it. Now, some of it is based on personality. Some people find happiness easier than others based on their personality type. Other people, people that are more cerebral, that kind of thing, they tend to overanalyze things sometimes, and it's harder to be really giddy when you're analyzing all the time. But everyone has the capacity to be happy, and that's really our goal. And so many people struggle with this idea that, well, I got married or got into this relationship because it was supposed to make me happy. I got this job because it was supposed to make me happy. I had these kids because they were supposed to make me happy. I bought this house because it's supposed to make me happy. I'm not happy. And especially when you get into your 30s, 40s, and you've got all these accomplishments that you've checked off the list and it's not making you happy, that's where people start thinking maybe it's them, or maybe I'm just not going to be happy, or maybe love doesn't exist. And a lot of this stuff comes back to, how do you have a passion for life? And how do you develop this passion for your family, for your job, for what you do? It's not going to be fun every day, but it is going to be fun some days. And that's where we fall down, is that because it's not fun every day, we're not looking for it to be fun any day. Because we're so busy running the household that we forget to enjoy running that household. We're so busy trying to keep the kids alive and not injured and fed that we forget to just have fun with them. And we forget that we went into this line of work because we enjoy it on some level. So have fun with it. Happiness is to some extent learning to have passion for life, learning that yes, life is serious and yes, life is tragic, but life is also fun. And so don't ignore the tragedy and don't ignore the serious side, but don't ignore the fun either. Have fun with it. Enjoy it. Let it be. When those good days come along, let them be. Don't wait for the other shoe to drop or say, well, that's not going to last. Of course it's not going to last. Have fun while it's there. The bad times aren't going to last either. Nothing lasts in life. It's all temporary. And so enjoy the times that come. That becomes our choice. And that becomes, again, to go back to my old word, that's a practice. We practice being happy. We practice being passionate about life, and it builds that happiness. We learn to have fun. We build our brain to recognize enjoyable things and build those synapses in our brain that go back to fun, that learn how to have fun. A lot of adults especially have to relearn how to have fun in life in order to recapture that passion.
Dr. Mark, do you get the feeling that we went through the hour faster this time than we did the last time?
Every time it gets faster. I do think that. And I was amazed how fast that hour went last time we talked, and now it just flew by. If you keep having me on, it's going to be just light speed.
We're going to cut down to about 15 minutes to make it an hour at some point. I mean, it's crazy.
That's got to be a sign of a good show.
It is. It actually is every single time. That's probably my number one way of gauging how successful I think a particular episode is. If it flew, I know that one's a winner. Yeah. I don't know who's going to resonate with it. I mean, I never know we talked about that last time you were here. Sure. In fact, I thank you, like I so often do. I thank you for all the people you've helped out that you didn't even know that you were helping, because it's a very important thing. But I also have discovered that the more enjoyment we have on this show, the more people we're helping in ways that we don't know about. Yeah, because it's also helping us, and that's the indicator. That's how we know. Yeah, and that's why it flies by so quickly. Yeah,
that's amazing. A fun show. I enjoy being here. This is my second show, and I hope it's not my last.
Anne-Marie, what's your big takeaway today? I always like to have you tie these things together. I mean, yeah, like you have 15 things to draw on. Which one are you going to pull on first?
Oh my gosh. I don't know if you've watched me, my eyes keep going here, there, and everywhere, because I'm like, and just the reflecting and thinking like, okay. I think for me, the bit I'm going to focus on, because when it first started, I was a bit kind of confused, where you said you have to love yourself in order to love others. And yes, it makes sense. But I was just then trying to go back to previous Anne-Marie, who struggled with emotions a lot more, but still was in a good, healthy marriage. But then you were saying, if you don't love yourself, then, that's, you go through the bad times. I was thinking, when we would go through those bad times, I wasn't a particularly happy person. Yeah. So I could then relate it. So I think do the work on yourselves, love yourself first. It's a good relationship to have with yourself. And then if you can then be that diamond to the next person.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I like that. Be the diamond to the next person. That's a good way to phrase it. I mean, if you can't be the diamond for yourself, at least do it for the other person.
Yeah, it's not selfish. Self-love is not selfish. It is important for yourself, but it gives you the capacity to love your family more, to love your friends more, to be better connected to your coworkers. It is not a selfish act. It is a building of love that you can give away.
And I always say being selfish isn't always a bad thing.
No, it's not a bad thing. Taking care of ourselves is not a bad thing at all. It never is.
Completely agree.
I even invented a term many, many years before I even understood how all this stuff works, because I recognized back when I was in my 20s that the word selfish really was a messed up word, because it just got completely abused. So I invented a word that never took off, never caught hold. But to me, it describes it really well. What people actually mean when they say, well, that person's so selfish. What they actually mean is they're blind to others, which, when you think about it, really has nothing to do with self at all. Yeah. But that's what they mean by it.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, if we're blind to others and have no compassion for others, then yes, that's obviously a negative. But taking care of ourselves and having compassion for ourselves and loving ourselves is not at all negative.
There's
nothing bad comes from that.
Yeah. So if anybody ever starts using the word other blind, you can attribute it to me, but I don't expect it to pick.
We'll work on that. Start using it in casual conversation.
Dr. Mark, thanks so much again for
my
coming
pleasure.
Back. It's been fun again. Yeah.
Thank you.
We really loved having you.
Thank you.
And thank you to our podcast listeners everywhere. We'll see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.